So now that I've got member variables pointing to both whatever ball I currently have in motion as well as my goal pegs, let's go through the process of zooming into that goal peg once those two objects get pretty close. Now, I'm not going to be doing anything particularly clever here. I'm just going to be doing some basic checking to see if my ball is getting close to my final peg, and that's about it. I suppose if I were to be clever, I could find a way of adding a large sensor maybe to my final peg and letting Box2D deal with when the ball collides with that large sensor or something like that, but I didn't get that fancy. So let's look at the pretty basic task of seeing when my ball gets close to my final peg. And I suppose in order to do that, the first thing I'm going to want to do is find out where the sprites of my various actors are on screen. So I'm just going to jump into my actor class, and I'm going to add a new function, public function, called getSpriteLoc, for getSpriteLocation, that will return a point. And all this is going to do is return a new point that will be my costume's X value and my costume's Y value. That's about it. So far, so good. So let's go back to my main Puggle class, and basically what I'm going to do is every frame I'm going to check and see, hey, should I be zooming in? So let's do that over in my new frame listener. So it looks like I am updating the world, I'm moving my actors, and now I will call a function called check for zooming. I'll hit Control-Shift-1 to generate this function. And this is going to be pretty straightforward. I will first check and see if the length of my goal pegs array is 1. That way I don't have to do this check for 90% of the time in my game. And also check and make sure our current ball is not equal to null. So at that point I know that my final peg, which is a peg actor, equals goal pegs 0. And actually, let me add in a little helper function here. Sorry. Let's add in a quick little private function called getDistSquared. I'm guessing you probably have your own version of this. If so, feel free to use it. But it's basically going to get the distance squared between 2 points. We'll call it P1 and P2. And we can return P2x minus P1x times P2x minus P1x plus P2y minus P1y times P2y minus P1y. There you go. Of course, if you want to get the actual distance between these 2 points, I would take this and get the square root of it. Since getting the square root of something is kind of expensive, I'm not going to do that here. I'll just remember that what I'm returning is the distance squared. So back in my check for zooming function, if I can, I'll say P1 is my final peg dot getSpriteLoc, and P2 is my current ball getSpriteLoc. And then I can basically say, all right, if my distance squared of P1 and P2 is less than, I don't know, let's say 75 by 75, then I know to zoom in. And so I'll just say camera zoom to, and turns out I actually already have my point. We'll zoom to the final peg point. And otherwise, we'll say camera zoom out. And this should probably work. Let's run it and find out. And let's see what happens here. All right, I apologize. It may take a little bit for my ball to actually get close to this final peg. Oh, there you go. All right, so we've obviously got a little weird flickering. That is something that we can probably deal with in a couple more lessons. I'm going to kind of leave the weird flickering in for now. But you can see that as our ball gets close to that final peg, it does zoom in, and that's pretty good. By the way, we're probably going to get some weird errors here. Yeah, you'll notice that I'm sort of zooming in to this peg that no longer exists, and that's just because I haven't quite cleaned up everything yet. So let's perform that little last bit of cleanup. So basically the only thing I really have left to do is to jump down here to my handle peg lit up function. And basically at this point I'm just going to say, hey, you know what? If my peg's been lit up and it's part of this goal pegs array, remove it from the goal pegs array. So let's say our goal peg index is goal pegs index of our peg actor. And if goal peg index is greater than -1, then we can splice it out of our goal pegs array. So simple enough so far. This will also make sure that if I actually started with more than one goal peg, they would gradually get removed from my goal peg index so that I would know when I'm actually close to hitting that final peg. And the one last thing we're going to need to do, and maybe I'll show you the bug so you understand why we need to do this. So right now, my ball hits that final peg, and then we never actually zoom out again. How come we're not zooming out when we were just zooming out 5 minutes ago? Because over here in our check for zooming function, we only zoom out if the length of our goal pegs is 1 and our ball is further than 75 pixels away. Now that's going to cause a problem when, say, I've zoomed into that final goal peg, my ball hits it. At this point, goal pegs.length is 0, so we actually never get into this loop where we can say, okay, now the camera should zoom out. So to fix this, I can also add a little else if goal pegs.length equals 0, then we can also zoom out. And so now everything should work properly. Our ball gets close to the final peg, and then once it hits it, we zoom out. Alright, things seem to be working fairly well, but there is some cleanup that we need to do. So let's take a look. First things first, this is not particularly efficient in that I am constantly calling camera zoom in and constantly calling camera zoom out pretty much every frame if there's only one goal peg left on the screen. And there's certainly ways we could probably make that a little better. In addition, we're getting some weird flickering when my ball gets kind of close to the peg but doesn't stay there for very long, and so we kind of do a very quick zooming in, zooming out. Plus there is the fact that I'm zooming in immediately instead of doing any kind of nice transition. So we'll deal with some of this stuff in future lessons. And I'm just going to mark down maybe a couple of to-dos here. So maybe don't call and zoom in every frame if I don't need to. We'll also stop the weird flickering. And then the other thing that I probably need to do is over here in my create level function, I should get this working for more than one goal peg. However, I'm not going to do any of that yet. And that's because I want to actually get our time slowdown function in and working before we move on to doing any of this cleanup. Once that's in and working, we can start to handle some of this cleanup stuff together. And that'll all be happening in the next lesson or two.